Rock Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive catalogue from one of the finest bands to ever come out of Sweden. And this band has been a force since bursting onto the scene back in the early 1990s, and they are still going very strong to this day as we speak. And this is a band that I've been wanting to discuss on this series for quite a while now. And this band has always been referred to by a lot of people as a very difficult band. You know, their music at times can be very heavy, very dark, and at times very atmospheric. And lyrically, their words can be very rebellious and very aggressive and very much in your face. And this band are as no holds barred as they come. They hold absolutely nothing back. And a lot of their albums are very concept heavy and they tend to address a lot of different contemporary issues such as sexuality, war, the environment, the nature of God, humanity, adolescence, isolation, and existence, you name it. And a lot of people have referred to this band's music as very challenging and very intellectual, which is, of course, no surprise because of the main man who has been at the helm of this band since its inception. And they've got a very unique sound. When you hear these guys, you know straight away it's them because a lot of their music is very guitar riff oriented. They have a very broad vocal range. Their harmonies can be very complex and very well structured, but you know straight away it's them. And the band that I am talking about needs no introduction whatsoever. I am talking about, of course, the one and only Swedish progressive metal band, Pain of Salvation. So, the first time that I became aware of Pain of Salvation was, of course, through Daniel Gildenlow when he played with Transatlantic as a touring member. And I always knew that Daniel Gildenlow was a super talented musician and an incredible multi instrumentalist, as well as a brilliant singer. But when I first got to listen to Pain of Salvation's music, I'm not going to lie, they really caught me off guard because they weren't really what you would call your traditional progressive metal band. You know, with a lot of progressive metal bands, it's always been the case of, oh, look at me, I can play the fastest, or who's got the biggest chops, or, you know, who can come up with the hardest riff, you know. That's what I've always looked at progressive metal. You know, it was always like progressive rock, but sped up. But with Pain of Salvation, they were like that, but it wasn't just about chops. It was about putting together these very unique structures and polyrhythms, which is, of course, no surprise because Daniel Gildenlow is the band's main songwriter and lyricist and vocalist slash frontman. And a lot of Pain of Salvation's music, you know, as I said, it's very concept heavy. You know, when Daniel Gildenlow puts together these concepts for the albums, you know, with a lot of concept albums, you always tend to have various movements, you know, like part one and part two. Daniel Gildenlow's concepts for Pain of Salvation, they could work as mini movies because they tend to work more like a soundtrack. So it's not just a case of we're going to play 10 songs and hope everyone likes it. You know, a lot of Pain of Salvation's music, as I mentioned, can be very out there, very aggressive, and very rebellious. And you're more caught up with what's going on in the story than the music. Even though the music plays a very big part in the concept, it's more lyric driven. So it's all about what's going on with various people and what's going on in these different situations. And Daniel Gildenlow is probably one of the most intelligent and sophisticated musicians I have ever come across in any genre. You know, obviously, you've got a lot of super talented musicians and composers who are very versatile, but with Daniel Gildenlow and what he does with Pain of Salvation, it's quite different. You know, you don't really see a lot of musicians do the sort of things that Daniel Gildenlow does for Pain of Salvation. And that to me makes Pain of Salvation, I wouldn't necessarily say a difficult band, but I would say it makes them a very unique band because they are very different to some of the other Swedish contemporaries like the Flower Kings and Catatonia. Although Catatonia do have some similarities to Pain of Salvation in terms of the issues that they address, but with Pain of Salvation, they really take it to different levels that probably Catatonia don't necessarily do. But I've had the great privilege of seeing Pain of Salvation on two occasions. And yes, their music did pack a punch. It is very much in your face, but they were fantastic shows. You know, they really know how to put on a great performance. And as I said, you know, their music is very concept heavy. So when you see them live, you're not necessarily just seeing a live performance of a band. You're seeing the story and concept brought to life. And for me, that's what makes Pain of Salvation one of the best bands on the progressive metal scene, in my opinion. So, Pain of Salvation was originally conceived as Reality and formed in 1984 by Daniel Gildenlow, and he would change the band's name to Pain of Salvation as he interpreted it as a balance between good and the bad. And he also looked at it as a good expression in everyday use when something does not go the way you planned, hence the phrase pain of salvation. And he also refers to it as a slight setback on a painless journey towards your goal. And Daniel Gildenlow has been at the helm of Pain of Salvation since its inception, and he has played and been a part of every single incarnation and lineup, and he writes virtually all of the band's music and lyrics. And Pain of Salvation have had throughout their history a number of different lineup changes. And the one that I would consider to be the classic Pain of Salvation lineup is the one comprised of Daniel Gildenlow, brother Christopher Gildenlow, Johan Holgren, Frederick Hermansson, and Johan Langell. That for me is the classic Pain of Salvation lineup. And the current Pain of Salvation lineup features Daniel Gildenlow, Johan Holgren, Leo Margaret, and Daniel Carlson. And for today's special edition, I am going to be discussing Pain of Salvation's entire catalogue of albums, which is a total of 12 albums, 11 studio albums, and one EP. And I've just got finished listening to Pain of Salvation's entire catalogue of albums, and I can honestly tell you now, there are no bad albums in Pain of Salvation's catalogue. There are some albums that are absolute classics, there are some albums that are close to perfection. There might be one or two albums that are probably not as strong as some of the others, and there are a couple of albums that I feel are a little bit better than others. But what I can tell you about Pain of Salvation overall, there are some pretty badass music. And any of these albums could be a number one or an all time favourites because this catalogue, for the most part, is remarkably strong. And you can start with any of them. And if I was to recommend Pain of Salvation to someone, I would just say check out the entire catalogue. There's so many good albums to choose from, and just work your way from there because they're all good as far as I'm concerned. quite a very extreme ride, but a very enjoyable one as far as a musical listening experience is concerned. Very enjoyable stuff here, and some of it for me kind of harkened back to early Dream Theater in terms of the heaviness. Just incredible stuff as far as I'm concerned. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Not an easy challenge. As I said earlier, there are no bad albums in Pain of Salvation's catalogue, and any of these albums could be a number one or an all time favourite. So, we're going to start with the first album, and this one came out in 1997, and this one is called Entropia. So, Entropia is the debut album from Pain of Salvation, and this album absolutely blew my socks off. I was totally unprepared for what I was about to hear. This album really helped set the tone for what Pain of Salvation was going to be all about. It's hard hitting, it's heavy, it's badass, you name it, rebellious, aggressive, it's got it all. And as of course, it's very concept driven. It deals with war and wow, just absolutely incredible stuff here. And I knew that it was going to be a heavy album, but when I got finished listening to this one, I just thought, okay, I need to take a breather for a second. Whew, just unbelievable, just incredible music. And I liked what I heard. I thought this was a fantastic debut album. And as I said, it really helped set the tone for what Pain of Salvation is going to be all about. So we've got the opener, exclamation mark, forward. And then we go straight into Welcome to Entropia, which is just unbelievable. And then we got Winning a War, which is excellent. People Passing By is great. Oblivion Ocean is great. Stress is great. Revival is brilliant. Void of Her is brilliant. To the End is excellent. Circles is brilliant. Night's Mist is great. Plains of Dawn is brilliant. And Leaving Entropia Epilogue, a brilliant closer. Top to bottom, a fantastic album from Pain of Salvation, and all of the music and lyrics are, of course, composed by Daniel Gildenlow. But you really get the sense that even though Gildenlow conceived all of the lyrics and music, it's very much a band effort. Everyone plays their parts and really put everything, including the kitchen sink, into this one. And it's an absolute classic. It really puts the prog in metal as far as I'm concerned. It's just a very heavy album and very enjoyable. Just an incredible listening experience. And the standout tracks for me are Welcome to Entropia, Stress, Revival, Void of Her, Plains of Dawn, and Night's Mist. But the whole album, top to bottom, is just fantastic. And wow, just incredible music. What a band Pain of Salvation are. I would definitely put them up there with Dream Theater in terms of musicianship and playing. Just unbelievable stuff. Daniel Gildenlow is just ripping it up on the guitars and with his incredible vocals. Christopher Gildenlow, just his bass playing, even though it doesn't probably get talked about enough, his bass playing on the early Pain of Salvation albums is just fantastic. He just brings so much muscle and meat to the sound and to the music, and he's just all over this album. My goodness, the entire band are all on top form. But the interesting thing about Pain of Salvation is it's very guitar heavy riff driven. You know, there are keyboards, but it's not as upfront as the guitars. So it's much more heavy guitar driven, but that's not a bad thing. You can still hear lots of keyboards in the background, but the guitars is very much up front. You know, there's a lot of this, there's a lot of that going on, but wow, just incredible stuff as far as I'm concerned. So there you have it. Entropia, Pain of Salvation's debut album, and absolutely incredible stuff, and the one that really got the ball rolling. as far as I'm concerned. Just a fantastic debut album from one of the best progressive metal bands to come out of Sweden. So there you have it, Entropia, brilliant album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1988, and this one is called 1 Hour by the Concrete Lake. So this is Pain of Salvation's second album, and it's equally as good as Entropia, and it's a concept album. This time, this album addresses nuclear power and nuclear waste, and it's a very heavy, dark, and badass album. Very enjoyable. This time, you can see in the compositions, it's becoming more of a band effort. Daniel Gildenlow, of course, provides all of the lyrics and composes most of the music, while the others also contribute to the music, getting credited as co composers. Just a fantastic album. And this album is made up of various parts and chapters. So you've got Part of the Machine, which is made up of 4 parts, Spirit of Man, which is made up of 3 parts, and Karache, which is made up of 4 parts as well. So there's various movements and parts, but you can still listen to it as one complete album, or you can listen to various parts. But it's a very enjoyable album, at times very aggressive and very rebellious, as are all of the early Pain of Salvations are known for, but still incredible music. So we've got the opener, Spirit of the Land, which is brilliant. And then we've got Inside, which is excellent. The Big Machine is great. New Year's Eve is brilliant. Handful of Nothing is brilliant. Water is great. Home is brilliant. Black Hills is great. Pilgrim is great. Short Serenity is great. And Inside Out, which is excellent. Top to bottom, another great album from Pain of Salvation, and lots of great guitar playing, thunderous bass work, great vocals, just an overall amazing sound made by Pain of Salvation. You can really tell that these guys are not here to mess about. They are the real deal and as real as they get. Just an amazing band with some incredible music. And the standout tracks for me are Inside, The Big Machine, Water, Black Hills, Shore, Serenity, and Inside Out. Just a great album. The album covers, some of them are a little bit strange, but it's Pain of Salvation. They are not known for being a fun band. These guys are as serious as they come. So there you have it. 1 Hour by the Concrete Lake, another fantastic album from Pain of Salvation, and equally as good as Entropia. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2000, and this one is called The Perfect Elements, Part 1. This for me could very well be my favourite Pain of Salvation album. This album is very dark, very deep, very heavy, very badass, very aggressive and rebellious. You name it, it's got it all. And I really feel that Pain of Salvation will really start to hit their peak with this one. The music is crazy, it's out there, very intellectual as well, which is, of course, no surprise as the music was conceived by the crazy mind that is Daniel Gildenlow, and he's on top form, as are the entire band. Just an incredible album, and it's a very deep album as well. You know, it's one of those albums that really requires you to sit down and pay close attention to the details. And you should check out the music video for one of these tracks. It's creepy, but very good at the same time. But very enjoyable album, and I would say that this is definitely one of the band's best ever. So, just like with all of Pain of Salvation's albums, it's another concept album and it's made up into various chapters. So, for chapter 1, which is called As These Two Desolate Worlds Collide, it's got 4 parts. And then chapter 2, which is called It All Catches Up on You When You Slow Down, which is made up of 4 parts. And then you've got chapter 3 called Far Beyond the Point of No Return, and that's made up of 5 parts as well. But top to bottom, a very enjoyable album, and I love it. I absolutely love this album, and probably the one I enjoyed listening to the most. Just a fantastic album. And when I think of Pain of Salvation, the one of the first albums that always comes to mind is The Perfect Elements Part 1. I think this really, for me, was Pain of Salvation making a huge statement, and everybody took notice. And it's got a bonus disc as well, so it's a double album, and the bonus disc contains various live performances of Pain of Salvation performing material from The Perfect Elements Part 1. But whew, great album, absolutely great album. So we've got the opener, Used, which is brilliant. In the Flesh is excellent. Ashes, probably my favourite track of the entire album. As I walk through the ashes, I call your name. Just fantastic. Morning on Earth is great. Idioglossier is great. Her Voices is great. Dedication is brilliant. King of Loss is great. Reconciliation is great. Song for the Innocents is great. Falling is brilliant. And the title track, The Perfect Elements, which is the longest track of the entire album, which is like just over 10 minutes long, is fantastic. And then we've got a bonus track called Epilogue. Incredible stuff. And then on the bonus disc, as I mentioned, we've got a couple of live performances of Used, Live, Falling, and The Perfect Elements. And then we've also got some studio tracks, Her Voices and Only That, Absolute Chromo Matter, and Ashes, which is more like an instrumental, but incredible stuff. Just absolutely incredible stuff. And the standout tracks for me are Ashes, Morning on Earth, Dedication, King of Loss, Reconciliation, Song for the Innocent, and The Perfect Elements. But for my money, one of the best Pain of Salvation albums ever, and probably my all-time favourite from the band. So there you have it, The Perfect Elements Part 1, an absolute masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2002, and this one is called Remedy Lane. So another fantastic album from Pain of Salvation, and by this point the band were just getting stronger and stronger, and just putting out some of their best work ever. And Remedy Lane is definitely no exception. This is equally as good as The Perfect Elements, and this is a special edition, and it features a bonus disc which features a live performance from Pain of Salvation, playing the entire Remedy lane from start to finish. So, if you are looking to get this album, I highly recommend buying the double edition. As I said, you get a live bonus disc of the band playing the entire album. It's definitely worth it just for that alone. And it's another great album. And of course, as always, it's a concept album which deals with self discovery involving themes of love, loss, lust, sex, and self understanding. But musically, it's great, it's dark, it's deep, and of course, as always, very heavy. And wow, just incredible music. And I would probably say that the early portion of Pain of Salvation's catalogue is just world class, just absolutely top notch music, and some of the band's best work, in my opinion. And really, I would go as far as to say that this is what they made their name on, as far as I'm concerned. They just put out some classic albums, and this album, Remedy Lane, I would put this up there with The Perfect Elements Part 1, just incredible stuff. So we've got Of Two Beginnings, which is a nice little short opener to help set the tone. And then we go straight into Ending Theme, which is brilliant. Fandango is great. A Trace of Blood is brilliant. This Heart of Mine, I Pledge is great. Undertow is brilliant. Rope Ends is great. Chainsling is great. Diarrhea of the Woods is great. And the title track, Remedy Lane, is good. Waking Every God is great. And Second Love is great. And then we've got the closer, which is just over 10 minutes long. Beyond the Pale. Incredible stuff. And the bonus disc, as I mentioned, is pretty much a live performance of the studio album. And that's equally as good as far as I'm concerned. Just incredible stuff. And the standout tracks for me are Ending Theme, A Trace of Blood, Chaseling, Waking Every God, Beyond the Pale, and Fandango and The Rope Ends. One of the best Pain of Salvation albums ever, another favourite of mine, and just very enjoyable as far as I'm concerned. Just absolutely fantastic. So there you have it. Remedy Lane, another great album from Pain of Salvation. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2004, and this one is called B. So B is another concept album, this time focusing on the existence of God and humankind. And alongside the band, it features a nine-part orchestra called the Orchestra of Eternity, which plays a big role throughout this album. And this album is the first Pain of Salvation album to feature multiple chapters, as opposed to the earlier albums, which was made up of three chapters and various parts. And this album, B, while it's a great album, it's a very head scratching album. It's one of those albums you really got to sit down and pay close attention to it because it's quite a deep album. There's lots of weird passages and very challenging stuff going on here. And it deals with many facets of human existence, so it's not for the faint hearted. It's a very emotional album, but it's a very good album. But I feel with this album, while Pain of Salvation really hit their peak with this album, I kind of feel like with B, this was kind of like the beginning of the end for Pain of Salvation. They still did put out good albums after this, but I feel that they kind of like shot their load with everything with this album, and I feel like this album is quite a heavy, bloated album. There's so much going on here. There's a lot of material to digest, lots of good tracks, of course, but this album it's just like okay, this is really challenging my brain in ways it's never been challenged before. And as I said, it's a very good album. I feel this is the band's rock opera, which it was kind of performed as when they took it out on the road. But yeah, it's a very different album. Let's say that. As I said earlier, a lot of people refer to Pain of Salvation as the difficult band. And I can see what they mean when you get to this album. And when you compare B to the first four albums, the first four albums are full on progressive metal albums. With B, still very much like that, but it's different. There's a lot more strings. The music's a little bit more orchestrated, so it's kind of like a blend between orchestral and metal, and it works. Don't get me wrong, it works very well, but it's a bit much to take in all at once. But I still enjoyed listening to it. It was a very enjoyable album. And B would mark the last album to feature brother and bassist Christopher Gildenlow, as he would leave the band after this album. And I feel that when Christopher Gildenlow left, I felt that Pain of Salvation lost something because his thunderous bass playing was a huge part of the band's sound. And while Pain of Salvation had great bass players after Christopher Gildenlow, I feel that Christopher Gildenlow really played a big part on the first five albums, and I felt that when he was gone, he took something with him, and the band lost a bit of their identity, in my opinion. And I feel that Christopher Gildenlow is not an easy guy to replace, and I do miss his presence very much, but he plays really well on this album, as do the entire band. But as I said, this album is quite out there, to say the least. So we've got Anime Partis, which is a good opener. Dus Nova, which is good. Imago is great. Pluvis Astivis is great. Lilium Cruentes is great. Nautucus is great. De Pecnue, which is made up of like three parts: Mr. Money, Penemeri, and I Raise My Glass. Vocari Day is great. Differiente is great, which is dubbed Exitus Drifting 2. Nil More is great. Laticuris Valete Omni is great. Ita Imperius is great. Martius Nacotius 2 is great. And Anime Partis 2 is great. It's a very difficult album, but it's an enjoyable one, I would say. It's a very enjoyable album. There's lots of different interludes, phones and telephone sounds and speaking and spoken words. There's all sorts of, and as I said, it's a concept album of all concept albums as far as I'm concerned. And the standout tracks for me are Imago, Plivius Avistis, Vocari de Differiente, Laticuris Valete, and Ita Impius and Martius Nactius 2. Overall, from top to bottom, B is probably the band's masterpiece. As I said, it works more like a rock opera, but there's a lot of music to digest. It's very out there, but very enjoyable nonetheless. So there you have it. B, the band's masterpiece and probably their most important work in their entire catalogue. But very enjoyable stuff, but you just got to be in the right frame of mind to listen to it. So there you have it. B, very good album and probably the most out there album of their entire catalogue. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2007, and this one is called Scarsick. So Scarsick is actually the sequel to The Perfect Elements Part 1. So you can actually look at this as The Perfect Elements Part 2. And once again, as always with Pain of Salvation, it's a concept album, and this time it's focusing on issues of capitalism, materialism, and consumerism. And Scarsick is much more song oriented. So a lot of the songs on this album are quite relatively short pieces compared to the earlier Pain of Salvation albums. And Scarsick is still a very enjoyable album, but this is the first album not to feature brother bassist Christopher Gildenlow. And as I said before, when he left Pain of Salvation, I felt that the band lost some of its musical identity because Christopher Gildenlow played such a big role in helping to shape the sound of Pain of Salvation, and his bass work was a big part of the music. I felt that when he left, they lost some of their identity with him. And Pain of Salvation's still a great band, still putting out good albums, but it's missing something. And Daniel, he's playing a lot more of the instruments. He's playing more guitars. He's playing a lot of bass as well. But I'm not going to lie, Christopher Gildenlow's presence in Pain of Salvation is dearly missed. But as I said, Scarsick, still a good album, but maybe not as strong as some of the other albums, but still good stuff. So this time, it kind of makes up like a bit of a vinyl. So we've got side A and side B. So we've got the title track, Scarsick, which is a good opener. Spitfall is great. Crib Caged is great. America is a good track. Disco Queen is just hilarious. This Disco Queen. Disco Queen. Disco Queen. Just absolutely hilarious. Kingdom of Lost is good. Mrs. Modern Mother Mary is great. Idiocracy is great. Flame to the Moth is great. And Enter Rain is a great closer. Still a great album, very enjoyable, but I prefer the earlier albums. They were just a little bit more stronger, in my opinion. But still some good stuff on here. So the standouts for me are Scarsick, America, Disco Queen, Idiocracy, Flame to the Moth, and Enter Rain. But good album, top to bottom. There's no bad tracks, but I just feel it's lacking something that the earlier albums had, in my opinion. But still a good album, I think, but I wouldn't say it's one of my favourite Pain of Salvation albums. But like I said, there's no bad album in this catalogue, but I just feel that there are some albums that are maybe a little bit better than others. So there you have it. Skarsig, an enjoyable album from Pain of Salvation, but not one that I tend to reach for that much. But still a good album. Skarsig, good stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2009, and it's an EP, and this one is called Linoleum. So Linoleum is an EP, and it's made up of 6 tracks. So that's bringing it to a total of almost 30 minutes worth of material. And we've got 2 non-album tracks exclusive to the EP. One track from Road Salt 1 and the other from Road Salt 2. And we've got a cover version of the Scorpions' Yellow Raven. It's an okay EP. It's not terrible. It is what it is. It's an EP. I feel that if you were to cut this up in half, leave the non-album tracks that are exclusive to the EP, and maybe keep the cover version, this probably wouldn't be as bad. But as I said, it's not something that I would reach for, but it's enjoyable. So we've got Linoleum, the title track, which is very good. Mortal Grind is great. If You Wait is good. Gone is good. Bonus track B is probably the shortest track of the album, and it's alright for what it is. And Yellow Raven by the Scorpions, very enjoyable. I thought it was a very good track. But top to bottom, it's a decent EP, but probably not one that I would reach for that much. That's just me. I just kind of feel like maybe this is a little bit of a filler between albums, but if you're a fan and a completist, then this is definitely worth having in your collection. But this is not something I would reach for that much. So standout tracks for me are Linoleum, Bonus Track B, and Yellow Raven. But overall, it's a pretty decent EP. It's enjoyable, but there's not really a lot to get your teeth into. Doesn't mean it's a bad album, because it's not. There are no bad albums in this catalogue, but yeah, it's an EP, but it's not really one I would reach for that much. So there you have it. Linoleum, decent album, little fun EP, and definitely worth having if you're a Pain of Salvation fan, but pretty good in my opinion. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2010, and this one is called Road Salt 1. So, Road Salt 1 is still very much a concept album, just like all of the previous Pain of Salvation albums. But this album is a lot more song oriented, so there's not as much longer pieces than some of the previous albums. And it's a lot more like a jam, so it's not really as heavy and in your face like some of the earlier albums. So it's a lot more stripped down. It still sounds like Pain of Salvation, but it's much more song driven, more like singer songwriter sort of style of music. And a lot of the songs on this album are relatively short. I think the longest track on this album is like 7 minutes long, but the rest of the album is like 4 to 5 minutes, 6 minutes long. So it's a good album, but it lacks that heavy, in your face sort of style of the earlier albums, but still very enjoyable. I quite like this, but I feel that with this album, especially around the middle part of Pain of Salvation's catalogue, there are a couple of albums, while they're not terrible, They're decent, still got some good tracks. I feel that they're lacking something as opposed to the earlier albums. Whereas the earlier albums, especially the first 4 to 5 albums, are really, really good. But when you get to this, it's just more like, I don't know really. Even Scarsick, had some really good tracks, but that was the first album without Christopher Gildenlow, and there was just going through a little transitional period in Pain of Salvation. But when you get to this, it's decent, but more song oriented, which ain't a bad thing. But I just kind of like the earlier albums, maybe just a little bit more. We've even got a guest appearance from Jonas Reingold from the Flower Kings, so that's pretty cool. But you know, it's a good album, but I don't think this is one I would reach for. But like I said, it's not a bad album. None of these albums are bad, but I just feel that there are some albums from Pain and Salvation's catalogue are a little bit better than others. So it's a concept album, as are most of Pain and Salvation stuff. So we've got side A and side B, so it kind of works out like a vinyl. That's just the way Daniel Gildenlow does things. And we've got like a couple of extended versions and a bonus track as well. So we got What She Means to Me is good. Then we've got No Way, which is one of the best tracks of the album. She Likes to Hide is great. Sisters is great. Off Dust is good. Tell Me You Don't Know is great. Sleeping Under the Stars is great. And then we've got Darkness of Mine, which is really good. Linoleum, which is great. Curiosity is great. Where It Hurts is brilliant. The title track, Road Salt, is excellent. And then we got the closer, Innocence. Top to bottom, pretty enjoyable album. Bit more song oriented, maybe not as heavy as some of the other albums, but still very good. It's still a great album. Pain of Salvation don't really do bad albums, but I'm not going to lie, there are some albums that I like maybe just a little bit more than others, but that's just me. So standouts for me are No Way, She Likes to Hide, Tell Me You Don't Know, Sleeping Under the Stars, Linoleum, Where It Hurts, Road Salt, and Innocence. But overall, a pretty decent album, but compared to the earlier albums, maybe just a little tad bit weak, but they're still good. I still enjoyed it, but I like some of the earlier ones just a little bit more. So there you have it. Road Salt 1, enjoyable album, bit more song structured, but still a great album from Pain of Salvation. Good stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2011, and this one is called Road Salt 2. So, just like in the name, this is part 2 of Road Salt 1. And Road Salt 2 pretty much continues the same trend that Road Salt 1 had. So, it's a lot more song oriented, not as many long tracks. And the longest track on this album is like over 8 minutes long, but the rest of the album, the tracks are like around about 4 to 6 minutes long. So it's quite a song structured type of album. So we don't really have the big, heavy epics of some of the earlier albums, but there's some good stuff on here. But this is like the middle part of the band's catalogue where, while they're not terrible albums, I don't feel that they're as strong as some of the earlier albums. But that's just me, really. So, just like Road Salt 1, Road Salt 2 is made up like a vinyl, so side A and side B. So on side A, we got Road Salt Theme, which is a great opener. Softly She Cries is good. Conditioned is good. Healing Now is brilliant. To the Shoreline is great. Break Darling Break is great. 11 is great. 1979 is good. And then we've got the bonus track of Salt, which is very good. The Deeper Cut is great. Mortar Grind is good. Through the Distance is good, which is probably the best track of the album, or one of the best tracks, I would say. The Psychics of Gridlock, probably the best track of the whole album for me. And End Credits, which is pretty good as well. But top to bottom, it's a good album. As I said, there's some good tracks, maybe not as strong as some of the earlier albums, but still very enjoyable. So standouts for me are Softly She Cries, To the Shoreline, Break Darling Break, 1979, Of Salt, Through the Distance, and The Psychics of Gridlock. But overall, pretty good album, very song oriented, a little bit laid back, but still good. Bit of an AOR album. I feel like a couple of these albums are kind of like that, but still good stuff. I wouldn't necessarily say it's classic Pain of Salvation, but still some good stuff here and still worth getting, in my opinion. So there you have it. Road Salt 2, a good, solid album from Pain of Salvation, in my opinion. Good album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2014, and this one is called Falling Home. So, Falling Home is an acoustic album and it features acoustic versions of some of Pain of Salvation's most well known material. And we've got a couple of covers in there as well, one of a Ronnie James Dio track and one of a Lou Reed track. And there's no new material on this album. As I said, it's pretty much stripped down versions of classic Pain of Salvation tracks. And it's a good album. It's cool to see this side of Pain of Salvation, but again, as I said, this is like the middle part of the band's catalogue where, you know, they're not terrible albums, but they're not as strong as some of the earlier albums. But it's a fun album. It's cool to see Pain of Salvation in an unplugged environment, but I kind of like want to hear more of the band doing what they do best, and that's kick ass and put out some really wild and out there kind of albums. But as I said, it's a fun acoustic album, but not one I would probably reach for that much. But doesn't mean it's a bad album. It's just, as I said earlier, there are some albums that I like maybe just a little bit more. So just like the previous albums, we've got a side A and a side B. So we've got Stress, Linoleum, both great tracks performed acoustically. To the Shoreline is great. Holy Driver is great. 1979 is great. She Likes to Hide is great. Chainsling is good. Perfect Day, which I think was probably the best track of the album. I thought it was a really good version they did. Spitfall is good. Mrs. Modern Mother Mary is good. Flame to the Moth is great. King of Loss is great. And Falling Home is good. Top to bottom, it's a pretty fun acoustic album. But as I said, maybe not as strong as some of the other albums. But as I said, it's nice to see a different side of the band. And it's enjoyable. There are some fun tracks. And I get the impression that Pain of Salvation just kind of wanted to have a little bit of fun and just go and do something different. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, let's get back to business and let's do what we do best. So, standout tracks for me are James Dio's Holy Diver, Perfect Day, which I thought was probably the best track of the whole album. It's a really good version. Mrs. Modern Mother Mary, Flame to the Moth, Falling Home, To the Shoreline, and Stress and Linoleum. Top to bottom, a fun acoustic album, but not one I would reach for that much if I'm wanting to listen to a Pain of Salvation album. But still good stuff here. So there you have it. Falling Home, good fun album. Not one of the band's strongest, but not one of the worst either. Just average, but decent. Some decent stuff here, in my opinion. But good solid album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2017, and this one is called In the Passing Light of Day. Without a doubt, one of the best Pain of Salvation albums ever, and a return to form for the band. And this is Pain of Salvation back at their heaviest and wildest best. And this is unbelievable stuff. Probably one of their strongest albums to date, and certainly as good as their earlier albums. It's got everything you want: heavy guitar work, great harmonies, just a badass sound. And I kind of feel like Pain of Salvation returned with a vengeance. You know, after a couple of albums that maybe weren't as strong, this album, it was like, we're back and we're back to doing what we do best. And yes, absolutely loved this. Great album, and really enjoyed this one a lot. And when I got to this album, my response was finally, we're back to where we should be, back where we belong. And it's a concept album, and this album deals with mortality, death, and the joys of anger of life. And it's a little bit of a different concept album for Pain of Salvation. This is more of a personal and emotional album because Daniel Gildenlow contracted a life threatening flesh eating bacteria which kept him out of action for a really long time. So he was unable to take part in the Transatlantic Kaleidoscope tour, which resulted in Ted Leonard from Enchanted and Spock's Beard stepping in for him, who did a really good job. So this is a very personal album. So this deals with all of the thoughts and emotions that Daniel Gildenlow was going through at the time he was hospitalized with this life-threatening disease. And all I've got to say is I'm so glad Daniel came out of this well. He made it and pulled through and just was able to come back to his band, and they put out an album like this. It's just excellent. This is some of Daniel's most deepest and most powerful writing that he's ever put down for a Pain of Salvation album, and it's fantastic. I absolutely love this. This was such a good album. So let's have a quick look. So as you can see there, it's pretty much what was going on with him at the time. So there's the band. So what you see here is just like various pictures of what Daniel was feeling at the time, both spiritually and emotionally. So as I said, it's a very deep album. So it's just a little breakthrough of how this album was conceived and how he was feeling during the creative process. So he pretty much what he did was he took his experiences and made a concept out of it, and it works. It really works. So there's all the lyrics as well, and then we got some more here. So there's Daniel looking like he's in hunter mode here. There's more there. So that's it. It's a quite a personal album. My God, he's ripped. Absolutely ripped to shreds he is here. Like I said, it's quite a dark, personal album. If you went through something like that, you would feel all sorts of crazy stuff. But yeah, it's a very personal album. Probably the most personal album of the entire catalogue. Some more here. So yeah, it pretty much deals with mainly mortality because when you've got a condition like that, you don't necessarily know if you're going to make it or not, which is totally understandable. Some good stuff here. As I said, when you look at these pictures, it's very, very personal. You know, I'm just happy that he made it out okay. I imagine that's Daniel and his children. There's a cool shot of the band. Yeah, it's a good picture there. Yeah. I was quite worried for Daniel. I wasn't really entirely sure if he would make it or not, but so glad he did. Really glad. There we go. Picture of the guys having a laugh, and yeah, Pain of Salvation assembles once again. But yeah, it's a good personal album. So we got On a Tuesday, just a heavy opener. Love it. Tongue of God is great. Meaningless is great. Silent Gold is good. Full Throttle Tribe, one of my favourite tracks from this album. This is my pride, my family. Excellent track. Reasons is good. Angels of Broken Things is good. The Taming of a Beast is good. If This Is the End, one of the most personal and deepest tracks of the entire album. Really good. And then we got the 15-minute epic, which is the title track, The Passing Light of Day. absolutely brilliant. And then we've got a bonus disc, which is just like, you know, demo tracks of all of the albums. But good stuff here. Very, very good stuff. So standout tracks for me are On a Tuesday, Full Throttle Tribe, Angels of Broken Things, If This Is the End, and The Passing Light of Day. Top to bottom, probably one of Pain of Salvation's best albums and one of their strongest to date, and a very deep, personal, and emotional album. Probably the most emotional album of the band's entire catalogue. Just absolutely tremendous stuff. So there you have it. In the Passing Light of Day, one of my favourite Pain of Salvation albums and a return to form for the band. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2020, and this one is called Panther. Another fantastic album from Pain of Salvation, equally as good as In the Passing Light of Day, and just a return to form for the band. And I've always said that if you look at In the Passing Light of Day and Panther, it's almost like a resurgence for the band. You know, it's almost like they came back stronger than ever and decided, you know what, let's get back to what we do best. Let's kick some ass and make some heavy music. And this album is so good and really enjoyable and a true return to form for Pain of Salvation. And they have never sounded better than they do here. And this album and the one before certainly up there as some of the most strongest albums they put out in recent years. Just fantastic stuff. Great production, great vocals, top notch guitar playing, just heaviness, you name it. It's got all of the classic hallmarks we know Pain of Salvation for, and just a really good album. Just absolutely amazing stuff. And this is a double album. So the second disc has got two demo tracks and two bonus tracks. But top to bottom, this is really good stuff. So we've got the opener, Accelerator, which is just one of the best openers for a Pain of Salvation album. Lots of heavy keyboard work, great vocals from Daniel Gildenlow, who sounds like a cross between Soundgarden's Chris Cornell and the Winery Dogs, Richie Kotzen. Just really good vocals. Unfuture is great. Restless Boy is good. Wait is brilliant. Keen to a Fault is great. Fur, which is just like a little short track, is good. Panther is great. Species is great. And the epic 13-minute Icon is brilliant. And the two demo tracks we got is off Panther, Keen to a Fault, and we got two bonus tracks, Fifi, Gruffy, and Unforever. Top to bottom, just a really good, strong album. And if you look at some of the pictures in the album, it's kind of like a concept album once again. You know, it's made up like a comic book strip of sorts. So some really good artwork here. I love the sketches. I think the sketches are really cool. It's kind of like a world full of dogs and panthers and all sorts of animals. Just really good. Just really, really good stuff here. I love the artwork here. Very, very tasty artwork, as you can see. And of course, you got the lyrics as well, which kind of like conveys what's going on here. It's a cool picture of the panther playing a guitar. And as you can see, got the lyrics here. So it's kind of left open here to be continued. So I'm wondering whether or not we'll see a follow-up to Panther. Who knows? We might do. Depends on what Daniel decides to do. There's all the credits. And you got the appendix as well. And some more cool sketches too. And some more designs. Some really good designs here. There's some like storyboards here as well. And there's like more like cool designs. And some pictures there as well of like alternate covers. Very good, very good. Great package. as you can see there. Very, very cool. Look at that. Very nice. So, standout tracks for me are Accelerator, Keen to a Fault, Panther, Species, and Icon, and Unforever. But top to bottom, one of the best albums from Pain of Salvation in recent years. In the Passing Light of Day and Panther, some of their best work in recent years. Just absolutely enjoyable. Really enjoyed this one a lot. And it's been 6 years already now since Pain of Salvation put out a studio album. We're long overdue now. Come on, Daniel. Get your thinking hat on. Let's have a new album. We're long overdue. It's time. Let's do it. So there you have it. Panther. Excellent album and one of my favourites from Pain of Salvation. Absolutely love this one a lot. Great album. So, which Pain of Salvation album do I think is the best one? Well, as I said at the beginning, after listening to the band's entire catalogue of albums, I can honestly tell you there are no bad albums in Pain of Salvation's catalogue. There are albums that are excellent. There are some albums that are maybe not as strong as some of the others. And there are some that I feel that are maybe a little bit better than others. And then there are a couple that are absolute classics. Like I said, any of these albums could be an all time favourite or a number one. But if I had to choose one album that I think is the best Pain of Salvation album, then I'm going with The Perfect Elements Part 1. When I first heard this album, it just completely blew me away. It was heavy, aggressive, hard hitting, dark, you name it. It had it all. And the moment I heard it, I thought, wow, this is incredible stuff. This is as prog metal as it gets. And it just really hit me in the face. And it's a fantastic album. It really is. And it's an amazing ride. And it just doesn't let up. And I think it's probably the band's best album. Now, some people probably would say, well, B's probably a good album. Yeah, it's a good album, but I think it's a lot to digest. I think it's one of those albums that you have to really listen to it on a good day with the right set of ears. But if you're looking for a good, enjoyable Pain of Salvation album, then The Perfect Element Part 1 is definitely the go to album. For me, anyway. I just think it's fantastic. Top to bottom, it's got some amazing songs and it's just nuts in a good way. So there you have it. The Perfect Elements Part 1. For me, the best Pain of Salvation album in their entire catalogue and my all-time favourite from the band. Just absolutely love this one. What an amazing album. And hopefully one day we might see something like this again. But we'll see really. And as I said earlier, it's been over 6 years now since Pain of Salvation put out a new album. Come on, Daniel, one more time. Let's have it. So there you have it. The Perfect Elements Part 1, my all time favourite Pain of Salvation album, and the one that I consider to be the band's best. Absolutely love this album. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Pain of Salvation album? Is it Entropia, 1 Hour by the Concrete Lake, The Perfect Elements Part 1, Remedy Lane, B, Scarsick, Yinyonium, Road Salt 1, Road Salt 2, Falling Home, In the Passing Light of Day, or Panther? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.